What's going on, guys? I'm on this amazing facility. This is Steel City Precision. Huge shout out to John. Thank you so much for letting me film here and do some training. The reason I'm here is actually this past weekend, I competed in the Steel City Precision Team Sniper match. So that was literally yesterday and the day before. So today's Monday, we competed Saturday and Sunday. We didn't do as well as we wanted to. We took 7th out of 37 teams. So not terrible, but we were trying to be in top 5. Get them next time. But obviously you can see this is one of the stages with all this brass here. But the video today is not about how the match went. This video is about rifle setup. And you're probably rolling your eyes here like, oh, Jesus Christ, like another video on rifle setup. Well, as much as I respect that and understand it, in my opinion, I think that most of those videos don't really go in depth as much as they should in terms of what we're looking for when setting up a rifle, as well as the different types of weapon systems that you may encounter or purchase or use, and also the different types of styles of shooting that you're doing. So it's kind of fluid. It's not like a one and done and this is good across the board for everything. So I want to give you a video a little bit more in depth, things that we're looking for as well. Now we always hear the main 3 things: length of pull, eye relief, and cheek piece. That is the meat and potatoes, but I think most people leave out a very important one, and that's bipod height. And I'll show you why bipod height directly correlates specifically with length of pull, and setting up the rest of the rifle from there. We'll go in a step-by-step process, and I'm also going to show you things to look for that could be cues as to like, maybe this isn't ideal for me. But I have a surprise for you. Scott Peterson of Veracity Solutions is going to be joining me out here in a couple hours. That's the reason I'm out here on this range for the next couple days, is because him and I have a class that we're teaching and collaborating together with December 15th and 16th. I don't know when this video is coming out. This video might drop just before or just after our class, but it's a precision gas gun course. So he lives in the area, so he's gonna come out, we're gonna hang out, shoot, train, get our dialogue together and squared away to bring you guys a better class. So I've got with me different rifles that we're gonna go over. Right now, for large frame gassers, as a demo for that, is my Knights Armament SR25A3. For small frame gassers, I brought the KS1 out for my teammate, so this will show you what to look for small frame gassers and considerations with that. And Scott's gonna be bringing out his bolt action rifle. He also has my bolt action rifle, the Aero Precision Solus rifle, because I'm also gonna be filming the final episode. I know, it's been long enough. So gonna knock that video out here as well. And so this way you'll get 2 different instructors and competitors' points of view with 2 different life experiences, talking about how we set up precision gas guns, or any gas gun for that matter. So a large frame gasser, a small frame gasser, and a bolt action rifle. And just understand, guys, like I said, we're gonna give you the macro here, the meat and potatoes. We're gonna go in depth. We're gonna give you some explanation as to why and what we're looking for. But it is okay that as you go out and start to shoot and gain your own experience, it's okay to make some small adjustments here and there. But hopefully you guys enjoy this video, and let's get to it. Okay guys, length of pull and bipod height and how they correlate and go hand in hand. So first of all, let's define what length of pull is. Length of pull is defined as the distance from the face of the trigger to the rear of the buttstock right here. That distance, when you measure, is called length of pull. Traditionally, how it's taught to find this is we would create this crook and this bend right here in our elbow, put the buttstock right here. Let me fully collapse this first off. All right, and we would start it there and then build the position to where when I do a 90-degree trigger finger, I have a perfect bend, 90 degrees right there at the trigger face, and like, cool, you're good to go. That's a really good ballpark, but just understand that's a gross adjustment to get you in that area. We can further refine this if needed. You might be good to go right there. But before we can really get into how we're gonna determine the length of pull, I need to go a little bit into the fundamentals of marksmanship, specifically and how it correlates with body position. And the reason for that is because we're traditionally taught to shoot in the pocket of the shoulder. Well, by doing that, that forces a lot of people to blade their body, because before bipods and front support was a thing, your support hand was the thing. So we would be in the pocket of the shoulder and then support from here. So I would have to blade my body to get the support hand out in front. Now we have bipods and front support to use. So I need to throw my body squared behind the rifle. And right now we have no optic on the gun. And the reason for that is because we want to build ourselves to the gun, not build our position around trying to get into the optic and get a good sight picture. So if you're if you're a really experienced shooter with this, you can get away with the optic on and know what it feels, what right feels like, but I recommend do this with no optic on. But when you do have the optic on, a way you can verify that your body is perfectly aligned is when we have that proper position, which I'm about to get into. When you breathe in and out, that should translate through the rifle from the stock to the muzzle. As you breathe in, you'll see that reticle drop directly 6 o'clock. And as you exhale, it should drop straight back up 12 o'clock. If it's going at the Z-axis, if you remember high school, the Z-axis or diagonal, that tells me that your body's misaligned, and it's usually in the base of your body. For the prone position, it's going to be in the hips, so I'm going to want to shift the hips to account for that. Standing, things like that, that's going to be at the feet. You move with the feet. But what I want you guys to do is bring that stock as high and as medial as possible into your body. The reason for this is it's going to drastically aid in recoil management with the gun. So what I want you to do is, instead of the commonly taught trait of stay as low as possible, where I come in like this, it's on the bag, and I scoop my body up to the gun. I see this all the time with newer shooters. Now what happens if I was to remove your support bag? You see how the gun wants to drop? Right now it's caught on my hoodie, but yep, there it goes. Now it drops. If I didn't have the hoodie, it would have just completely fell. What I want you guys to do, though, is bring that gun high and medial. So as high to your center line as possible. It should be sitting in the middle of your clavicle or collarbone. And I want to splay my elbows out. I want to be perfectly squared behind this gun. And now you can see this whole time, like the bag's right here. I have complete control of this rifle, and it's not going anywhere. That's going to drastically help me with my recoil management. Now, obviously the bipods are too low. So what I'm going to want to do is bring these bipods up, get my body up, even though that goes against what's commonly taught of staying as low as possible. And what I'm looking for here is, think of the junction right where my abs go into the sternum. And I want that sternum to be like the contact point. And now my chest is off the ground. But the good thing is the arch of my lower back is not as super drastic to where it's causing a bind and it's uncomfortable. So here, I still have the inner part of my elbows contacting the ground, which is what I want. If I'm too high, you'll see that you're on the tips of the elbows. You're going to start to feel strain in your lower back, and you're kind of wobbling on the tips right there. So that's too high of a position. Right about here, where you feel the contact in the inner part of your elbows, I still have 100% contact of the butt pad just with my body, and the rear bag is just to fill in negative space. And this feels really solid. So now what I'm looking for with the actual length of pull itself, I know we kind of got off on a tangent there, but we kind of have to talk about that before we can get to this, is I want to pay attention to wrist angle and also how I feel in my shoulders, right? So if right here, I can tell I'm a little too close. The wrist angle, I feel a little bit of pinch and like trying to get my finger in this through the trigger guard. I kind of got to bind it to then get it there. And I feel right in the junction where my neck meets my shoulder, it's kind of pinched and like my shoulder's scrunched up to try and get on the gun. It's too close, it's uncomfortable, it's gonna cause strain long-term on the rifle. So the opposite of that is completely out. If I rip this out, full length, now I still wanna build that position properly, get square behind the gun, and I come on it, I already feel like I'm too long. Like my face is barely even on this cheek piece. I can tell like this whole system feels away from me. And a common thing you can find is when I go to rack the bolt, when I come up, let me send this. So the reason I want to do that is because I want to send the firing pin, because on these bolt action rifles, cocking, at least this Rem 700 style, when I go to lift this, it's going to be heavier because that's cocking the firing pin, and then I can rack. So this is how you should test it for your length of pull. So when I go to rack and cock, you can see my elbow had to come off the ground and the muzzle dipped down. If that muzzle's dipping down, it's a good sign that your length of pull is a little too long, because now I'm having to reach, so your elbow might do this motion right here to lift and then actuate the bolt and come back. I can get away with a lot because a lot of this is like driving, right? You get in a new vehicle, we set our steering wheel, our mirrors, and our seat for us, setting up the rifle, if you will, and you think it's all good to go. And because you've been driving so much, you can get away with it. But as you're driving over time, you find that the little micro adjustments you need to make, you do it with no big deal. Same thing with shooting. So don't be surprised if we make our macro adjustments here, but as you start to train and shoot and compete, you might have to make some small adjustments. That's completely acceptable. But this definitely feels too long. If I'm too short, I already told you how scrunched up I feel with the wrist angle. The wrist doesn't have any impingement here, but everything else is a no-go. So let me come in a little bit, and right about there is usually what I like. And this feels really nice. So right here, I can actuate the bolt. So drop. I can actuate the bolt. I have no issue doing any of this. Go through this a couple times. So this feels really nice for me. And I've found that a lot of times there's a nice little blend of a sweet spot. So this position or even one position further out, I can get away with it and it feels about the same. If I'm in that ballpark, I'm gonna favor one notch in. And the reason for that is as I get off the ground and get into standing positions or barricade props, stuff like that, tripod shooting, I'm gonna be a little further off the gun just due to ergonomics of everything, especially with my face being further back on the gun because your face is furthest forward in the prone and it gets further back as I get off the ground. We'll get more into that with eye relief. But this way, it buys me comfort in those positions versus being on the bleeding edge of it, and now I need to come in a notch. So I try and build a position for length of pull that works across the board so I don't have to make those adjustments. However, it is okay. There's really top-level shooters that do have to adjust a notch or two as they change positions. High angle and low angle shooting is a whole other ball game and story. I'll have to play with that stuff too, especially if you're running like a trigger cam on your optic or how the eye relief is. So for those positions, that's one thing, but those are extremes. But generally speaking, I try and set the rifle up to where I don't have to mess with it across the board, but it is okay if you need to. So those are things that I look for, guys. So let's see what Scott has to say. You got anything?
Yeah, so not to really add too much, guys and gals, but just remember, so when we're doing this stuff, like Ryan said, back in the day, we were all told like we were brainwashed, and it was like one way is the only way. There's multiple ways to do this. Don't be afraid to change things. Don't be afraid to adjust minute things. Some chassis have like riser adjustments, so the bag rider here is also adjustable vertically, so you could extend that out to change positional stuff. Yep. Some have swappable fore ends. There's so much different stuff out there these days. Butt pads. Folding butt stocks, collapsible, fixed. So, something to note on this bolt gun side, if you're one of those that uses, a Manners, a Macmillan, a Foundation, and various options like that, a lot of those stocks are fixed length. So knowing, kind of having, especially if you have a gas gun or something that, that's your first foray into a bolt gun, having a way to measure your length of pull, measuring, like he said, the distance from the trigger shoe to the back of the butt pad, having a measurement for that. So when you order these stocks, you don't just go to the local shop and buy one, then all of a sudden you're cramped and you can't do anything about it because it's not adjustable. So if you're able to borrow a gun, get with a friend or whatever, find this and utilize their gun, or even go to the gun shop and find one that's adjustable. Take your measuring tape with you, set it up like this. Most of them aren't going to have optics on them anyways. And now you have a baseline to order, your favorite stock or whatever you want to do. A lot of hunting stocks, people buy fixed length because they're looking for as light as possible. So when you start getting in the chassis, you're adding weight. Every time you add a screw, a bolt, adjustable cheek riser or something, you're adding weight. So just something to be aware of throughout your journey into precision rifle, whether it be gas gun or bolt gun.
The only other thing I will add is a lot of modern chassis give you the ability to rise and lower and cant the butt pad itself. I used to be a guy that would play with that. Talking to people that know more than me, I would raise it and they're like, you could raise it, but then that lowers the rifle itself to you. Whatever works for you, it's totally preference. So all that little micro adjustability with canting the butt pad, I found that the canting to the right helps as a right-handed shooter when I was raising the butt pad because it was digging into my neck, like almost in my carotid artery. And I was like, well, I don't want to black out behind the gun. So I had it risen up, but I would have to cant it to get it off my neck because we want to come in medial. But I went back to just a more traditional squared face of the butt pad. But whatever you guys want to do, it's total preference. But yeah, let's get to the gas gun now.
All right, guys, so we're going to cover real quick. This is specifically a small frame gas gun. There are some nuances between this, a large frame, as well as a bolt gun. For the most part, with positional shooting, when we say that from prone to barricades to tripods and things like that, once you set the length of pull, you should be on a spot where it's the same or relatively the same, few minor adjustments throughout all positions. All right, so the nuance is mainly from large frame and small frame gas guns. Some of them, depending on, you get used to mounting your optic in a certain go off Picatinny spot versus actually setting up the gun and length of pull. People will mark that, count Picatinny spots, things like that. Some guns have more Picatinny in the rear or up front than others. This one has an extended tenon, so it has more Picatinny out front than a standard receiver. Large frame receivers, a large frame being like your SR25, your AR-10s, things like that. They also have a longer receiver because the mag well is longer, right? So when you're adding length in the mag well, you also add length in the receiver. So just things to note if you're one of those guys that just lays the gun down and starts counting Picatinny or using like the T1, T3, T5 slots as your reference. Just know that depending on manufacturer, there could be a whole nother pick slot or two here on some guns. And so that could mean a different measurement. So when we do this, I want to get down on each gun. You could use a measuring tape and things like that and baseline your guns that way. So right now I'm fully collapsed on the adjustable buttstock. So this one does not have a vertical butt pad adjustment like a lot of the bolt guns do. Very few gas guns actually have that adjustment outside of like your PRS Gen 3 stocks and whatnot. I prefer that, but that's a conversation for later. So I have adjustable cheek piece here, and I can adjust my length of pull versus the detents and the buffer extension, as well as the wheel back here that extends the butt pad itself. So a couple things to note when you're purchasing your buttstocks, the B5s have various length cheek pieces. So if I were to set this up fully collapsed just like it is, and I go to rack my charging handle contacts. So if that's the case, for this one, I may specifically find the spot where my charging handle will clear no matter what, and I may start there, right? So that's the option one. So many times I see people complaining on the internet about the stock they bought, or they bought like the different cheek riser or some of the ones that can glue on now. Sun and Shadows and others have like 3M sticky tape you can add. Make sure that your charging handle clears. So like before we even get into setting up length to pull, you need to know, kind of do some research and figure out the items that you're gonna buy or you have bought will actually work with what you're trying to do. So without further ado, we're gonna start with our length to pull. Some people will start this with the crook of the elbow and using that as a 90 degree, and they just leave that. We're gonna go a little more detail on this, as well as what Ryan's talked about in the bolt gun section. So I know that I can clear my charging handle. That's step one. So the next things I'm going to look at, just like he said, I'm going to get medial with the buttstock placement near center line of my neck or my body, as well as I'm going to look at my grip angle. So there's multiple grip methods with gas guns where wrapping the thumb or having the thumb, the precision grip, as some call it, where the thumb is on the same side as the firing, your trigger finger is, versus wrapping it. I wrap the grip. As talking to Ryan, he wraps the grip as well, and there's some history behind that we can talk about later. But I'm looking at my grip angle. So if I pull my sleeve up, you'll see as I change length here, just like he did in his video, you'll see my wrist angle change. So I want that fairly comfortable. I don't want a bunch of pressure in my wrist, just like we talked about pressure in the lower back and the neck. I want to be fairly comfortable, barring any injuries. Some people will have certain injuries that you're just, unfortunately, you're going to have some pressures and things that you don't want, just for, circumstances in your life. So just like Ryan did in the other video, right now I'm going to start. I have my bipod set to where I can manipulate it without really having to break my position down as far as bringing the gun in. I get it out there just where I can reach it. Maybe I have to roll a little bit. In a perfect world, I would want it a little bit closer, but then now I start closing the gap where I shoot off a barricade. So I'll start middle position on my SkyPod on the right, all the way out on the left on the leg angles there, just to make it easier for setting heights instead of extending legs. When I'm setting this up, I'm gonna come in high, just like he said. First off, I'm in line with my gun, so my spine is also directly in line. Again, barring any injury, my back is mostly screwed up in the lower end, so up top I'm pretty good. So I'll get directly in line with the gun, bring the gun in, scoot up a little bit. I'm starting high, and then I come down. And do I need the bag? No, right? So I can set my bag off to the side, and hey, fell in a detent right there. So looking at my wrist angle here, I can already tell that this is pretty close. Now I have no optic. We're doing that again for a reason, to show that we start without the optic, to set the gun up to fit us versus us fighting ourselves to fit to the optic. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm not necessarily worried about my trigger finger placement because we can change that with various grips that are available. Right now my finger would be more boxed, meaning that it's on the second pad with this where my hand's at. The wrist angle is pretty tight. Could I shoot this way? Yes. Could it also start inputting torque to the gun? Most likely. So I'm going to extend a notch depending on how many detents you have, like your 6 positions. I've got a buffer extension that has, or buffer tube, if you will, that has like 16 positions. They're very, very tight together. So obviously your click adjustments will vary. Again, just like your Picatinny slots will vary from the type of buffer you have, or buffer tube. So I'm gonna check this again. Again, making sure my elbows are, I'm squared up as possible. Get medial again, bring it in. Wrist angle is still a little more than I want, and so is my finger placement. So I know me, I'm usually on the 1 mark on this Viltor. So I'm gonna check it one more time, come in. Nice rocks on the elbows there. And that feels fairly comfortable. Now I know that for just experience, the clicks on this Viltor are a little gross, so I will come out just a little bit more. And again, I'm basing a lot of this off feel. I will let recoil in my optic kind of tell me the rest of the story. So I've got my finger placement right on the first pad where I like it, my shoulders, everything fairly squared up, and I just relax on the gun. All right. Now, I'm not worried about my cheek piece height right now because that's once I do mount the optic, I will play with that. But there's not a whole lot different except for how these things adjust versus the bolt guns. A lot of bolt guns are Allen keys. Some may be toolless. Some may have no adjustments. Some of your older, traditional McMillans and Manners, even the older foundations and things like that do not have a length of pull adjustment. So you need to know things like this, mock it up, and then get a measurement when you order your stocks on your bolt gun side. Just be aware of that. Same for some of you guys that are the big and tall shoppers, knowing what buffer extensions to get as well as butt stocks for your length of pull. If you're in that close to 15 plus inch range, a length of pull, you're going to have to, you're very limited to what you're going to get, and you don't want to be necessarily cramped on the gun. So you want the gun to work for you and not you have to fight for the gun, okay? But yeah, so that's all we're going to start with right now. Again, now, if I want to change the height of my butt stock, or as you were, the bipod, then that's where I just roll, come in 1 notch, change it again. And you can see, for me, I'm usually middle to middle on my SkyPod. This is my prone position, just because I want to get my chest, I'm a thicker guy, I want to get my chest off the ground a little bit more, and I utilize my bag quite a bit. So for me, this is typically more comfortable than getting super low. Any higher than this can be detrimental. If I'm shooting some of these downhill targets, obviously I want my bipod a little lower, but just be aware of that. As we get up off the ground, and Ryan will talk here in a little bit, once we get on the barricade, once we mount our optic, as we get off the ground, our head's going to come away from the optic a little bit. So take that into account, and that's when he said earlier, don't be afraid to like change stuff incrementally as you get used to this and as you learn what works for you. These are not 100% like this is the only way to do it. So that's all we got.
So another consideration that we want to account for is if you're also having a law folder, like my SR25 does, don't be surprised if your stock has to come in an extra notch or two just because of that added length on the back of the receiver extension, aka buffer tube, because you're getting probably about another 1.5 inches or so of length there. Now, I've seen on like my small frame gassers versus my large frame, I've seen a little bit of variance in measurement from in the length of pull, like literally with a tape measure from the face of the trigger to the back of the buttstock. Now, I noticed like if you flip over the rifle and you look at the detents, you'll see that depending on the buffer tube that you're using, they're spaced differently. So you very well could have different measurements versus his, as you can see here, hopefully you can see it, they're really fine and really close together. So you can get those micro adjustments more than the fatter macros like a traditional AR-15 does or has. Like between my SR25 and then like my AR-15, there's like a whole 1/4 inch difference between the two just in terms of detent slot to detent slot. So I'll see differences there. And on these small frame gassers, I noticed like I started to lean more towards the A5 system because in the prone position, I still feel like even at full extension with a traditional non-A5 system, I'm too close on the gun in the prone position. Like it just feels like I could come back a notch. So I like it, and it actually makes my length more equal to like my large frame gasser setup, which is nice. So those are considerations to have as well when setting those up. But again, don't be surprised if you got to make those micro adjustments for that. Now, if you're trying to find this video for rifle setup for like red dots and stuff, one thing I learned from John Duffy, was you'll actually see a recoil impulse difference, mostly like standing. I'm not talking about prone precision shots, but like standing with a red dot gun. You'll see a little bit of a recoil impulse difference with a stock fully collapsed versus all the way out. I guess it's just like how that, how it's reverberating up against the stock internally and then driving into your body. So I used to be like 3 notches out kind of guy, and I'm 5'7", and I was like, okay, cool, this is nice and compact. And I found that actually I run a stock damn near all the way out, maybe 1 click in, even for run and gun red dot stuff. But I recommend go to other instructors that are teaching that stuff to learn more about that. This is more geared toward the precision stuff. But yeah, I think we can move on to the eye relief setup now.
All right, so we've talked about how we set up the bolt gun. We've talked about how initially on the small frame gasser, how I've got it set up for length of pull. So again, those are the macro adjustments. This is still the baseline. Once we get into off our belly, we start shooting positional off barricades. If that's what your use case is, then there may be more adjustments needed. So what we're gonna do move into now is setting up the optic for eye relief, as well as we'll talk more about how to adjust, how and why to adjust the cheek piece and when we do that. So without further ado, I'll let Ryan kick this off. I'm just gonna be the demo dummy for now.
Yeah, guys, so when we're setting this up, we want to make sure that the shooter is built in the position that he needs. Like I talked about in the intro of this with the bolt action rifle, coming high and medial, building that right position. That's why we're setting up the length of pull the way we are. So we want to be absolutely comfortable behind the rifle at all times. And then we make the optic fit us with the eye relief. We don't want to build around that. So let's talk first about what eye relief is. Eye relief is how far my eye needs to be from the ocular lens. This is the ocular lens, this is the objective lens. How far my eye needs to be from the ocular lens to have a perfect sight picture. Perfect sight picture meaning there's no scope shadow or technical term, vignetting around the image. So when we set this up, we want to do this on maximum magnification. It doesn't mean that I want you to shoot on max power. I'm just trying to give you guys as much forgiveness as possible, and I'll further expand on that. So if you're looking down the optic from way far back, you'll see this little beam of light in the ocular lens. That's called exit pupil. So as I power up and power down, you'll see that beam of light shrink and grow, kind of like looking through a straw. Well, how does that correlate to my eye pupil, and why does that matter? This is a little bit of the science aspect of it. It's not super imperative, and this is more towards driving your decision of an optic purchase. So hopefully this is something you know before buying an optic. So the way I know my size of my exit pupil is I would take the size of my objective lens in millimeters divided by the magnification that I'm on, and that's going to tell me how big in diameter the exit pupil is. I promise there's a point to this. So let's say I have a 50 millimeter objective lens and I'm on 10 power. That 50 divided by 10 is 5. So my exit pupil will be 5 millimeters in diameter, okay? Well, in a bright day, middle of the day, on average, the human eye pupil will restrict to about 2 or 3 millimeters. So when I'm on that 10 power with that 50 millimeter objective lens, and we'll say my eye pupil is 2 millimeters, that 2 will fit inside that 3 millimeter and still have room to play. So I'm not gonna get that scope shadow until I get extreme out of it on either side. I've got that forgiveness in that window. Now, if same example, now it's a little darker out, on average, the human eye will dilate to about 8 or 9 millimeters. We'll say it's 8. Same example, 50 millimeter objective on 10 power gives me a 5 millimeter exit pupil. My eye is 8 millimeters, but the exit pupil's 5. I will never have a perfect sight picture. I will always see some scope shadow around it because my eye pupil is seeing around that beam of light in addition to the sight picture itself. So things to consider. Is it really imperative right now for setting this up? No, but it's nice to know before buying an optic, because everyone says the objective lens, it's like, oh, it's about gathering more light. Technically, yeah, more light would be coming in, but it's all about exit pupil and how that interfaces with your eye pupil based on the lighting conditions you find yourself shooting in. So when we set this up, I want to do it on max power, because not only is it going to be the tightest exit pupil size, but it's also going to shrink my eye box. Now the eye box is this imaginary, invisible cylinder, if you will, about how close forward and how far back, up, down, left, right, torsionally, whatever you want to call it, that I can be and still have a perfect sight picture without inducing scope shadow. The higher on the magnification I go, the closer it's going to become to the ocular lens, and the tighter that box is going to get as well. So everything is worst case scenario now on this max power. So if I can set this up on max power in the worst case scenario, as I power down, it's just going to be easier from there. Again, this does not mean you shoot on max power. Like on my 27 power, I'm never shooting on 27, but I still want to set it up to that. The one exception I would say is like a 7 to 35 and you're going on 35 power, like, all right, it's really tight now at this point and you're asking a lot. If you bumped it down to 30 or so, I'll leave that up to you guys. Anyways, when I set this up, that's how we want to do it. So when we're prone, Scott's face right now is as far forward as it's going to be in this prone position. As we get off our belly and get into prone position, or I'm sorry, standing positions, barricades, tripods, stuff like that, his face is going to get further back away from the optic. Again, this is why we want to set it on max power. So if it's good to go at the tightest, most restricted position, as I get off my belly, I'll be good to go. All right, so, and then again, you can test this again, like I was saying with length of pull and barricade and stuff like that. So we're gonna set this up as if it was too far forward, but just for administrative purposes, we'll remove the accessories just so make sure it's not hitting or anything like that. All right. So put this right here. All right. So I'm just gonna snug it up a little bit just to help him make sure he's in the eye box, because if it's really loose, it might be too far left or right. So I just want to snug it up just a hair, just to make sure it's pretty even for him. This is where we can also make a minute adjustment on the cheek pad if you want, just so you're not in like complete dead space, but we'll get into like fine tuning from there. So right now we're on max power, and I know this is gonna be too far for him. So Scott, tell us what you're seeing right now.
Yep, so, you know, if I were, like Ryan said about exit pupil and things like that, things I've looked up, I've looked at the optic when I purchased it, I looked at the specs and saw what exit pupil dimensions it had, as well as potential eye relief distances. Sometimes you'll get multiple eye relief distances, like a range from the optic manufacturer, and that's kind of like at its lowest magnification, how much error you have, or it'll give you one number, which is typically the highest. So looking at Vortex, I believe it's like 3.5 or 3.6 inches eye relief on 10 power for this 1 to 10. So I know that, you know, the math should work out where I'm approximately 3.6 inches. I can tell you right now that this is much farther, so that I know it's automatically too far. When I come into the gun, first off, I can tell that I'm way too low. So when he talked about exit pupil, some of you may also know that shadowing and vignetting as scope shadow. So I'll refer to it as scope shadow hereforth. So right now, as I come down on the gun, I can see that pupil size, or I see the shadow, and then I rest my head naturally, and I can tell that I'm too low. So right now, we'll go ahead and just make that gross adjustment and raise my cheek piece. And again, kind of rebuilding. Okay, so this feels pretty good, at least for now. I may have to refine it again later. So again, I've come high end medial, got my face on the gun. I'm not forcing my head down, I'm naturally laying it on the gun. And right now, that feels pretty good on height. I think I'm a little too high, but we'll get there in a minute. Right now, what he was talking about is I see a small pupil, or I see through the optic in a small, lit up hole, essentially. And outside of that, that is half of the ocular size. The rest of it is all black. It's all scope shadow. So I know that for having experience, this is too far away. So what Ryan's going to do now is he'll loosen it and come in just to speed up the process. We'll probably come back. We'll just come all the way back, which should be too close, and we'll talk about that. So again, just snugging it back down so it's kind of, you don't have to torque it, but we just want it to align on the Picatinny slot so it's not left and right. Again, because I know where this gun should be with this optic, this is too close. So I'm going to talk you to what I see. First off, this verifies that I am too high on my cheek piece. So now I see scope shadow in the bottom of the optic. Okay, that feels good. I'll rebuild my head position a couple times. That'll work. So what I also see now is, not only do I see I don't have the scope shadow that we talked about when it was too far away, but now what I see is almost like a tunneling vision where I can see inside of the optic. On older scopes, or like if you ever shot the ACOG and you were too close into it, you would see the serial number in the bottom of the glass. It's etched on a lens. So that's how you knew you were too close. So if you've experienced that, that's what I see right now. I see the inside of the optic like tube where like the collars and the threads and all that. So I know that I'm too close. With that, these are just extremes, okay?
This is where he would know if he was too close, also because of that. He's experienced with it. But if you guys didn't know what you're seeing, if you would have this thing called turtlenecking and goosenecking. If you turtleneck, like shrinking your head in, I'm sure you would end up seeing it. Are you falling within it now?
Yeah, so if I were just to get on this gun naturally to see what I wanted to see perfectly, I would have to bring my head back about right here.
Yeah.
So that goes against the principles we talked about when we set up length of pull. Now I'm fighting the gun instead of making the gun fit me.
Exactly.
So we don't want to do that because that affects you positionally, recoil management, fatigue, pain, everything else down the road.
Now, if it was opposite too far, he'd have to gooseneck and elongate his neck to get within it. We don't want to do any of that. One thing that I do though is once I get it right, which we're about to do, if it's a hair too close on max power for me, I'm okay with that because I know as I get off my belly, like I said, my face is going to get further back. I'm going to be within that eye box to where I want it. So we'll go ahead, loosen this, and we'll see how it goes. Another thing you guys can do is we've already mounted these in the rings, but if you have a buddy and you've got some individual rings or you have the top caps loose, you can have a buddy put the rings essentially where you want them, and then from there, put the optic in the rings and just don't snug them up, but keep them loose so the optic isn't falling out, but tight enough so the optic isn't falling out, but loose enough that you can move back and forth, and have your buddy move the optic closer to your eye or further away. And the reason for that is that way he can specifically tell you, okay, keep coming, keep coming, keep coming. All right, right there. The moment he says right there, he has a perfect sight picture, I would come closer to the eye about another 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch or so to make sure I'm centered in that eye box, not on the bleeding edge of it, if that makes sense. So we'll try right here.
And so something else that using the method he talked about, what that'll allow you to do is if you know that you're going to be within the realm of already where you're going to be because you have experience mounting the optics, it allows you to go ahead and preset accessories, and then you move your adjustments there. Exactly. My accessories are all mounted to the optic, minus the timer, which will go in front because I don't need it to mount on a receiver. I'm not worried about it being level. But everything else is mounted on this optic mount or the optic itself. So I'm not worried about clearing, a timer or a data board or something back here or up front.
Yeah. All
right. So we're now, we went 2 slots forward. Okay. So we're almost there. Right now what I see is I have about 75% visual pupil size through the optic and about 25% of the scope shadow, meaning now we are a little bit too forward. So just off experience, what I'd tell Ryan, we're going to loosen it up. We're going to come to T2 slot or 2 notches back. Right now, that lug is in T4. The first one a minute ago, we went all the way back to T1. So we're going to come back right here.
And since I already know this is going to be the spot that he needs, what I want to do is pull forward on the rings, the mount itself. And the reason for that is think of when you're driving in a car and you're driving fast and you slam on the brake, you go flying forward. So when this rifle recoils, anything attached to it on top is going to want to shoot forward. So Picatinny is literally just recoil lugs. So when I push this as far forward in the slot, because you'll still feel a little bit of play back and forth in the slot, I want to go as far forward as possible up against the front of that recoil lug, so that way it's got nowhere to go when I go to do that.
Yep.
Or when I go to shoot, sorry.
I'm pushing on it with my thumb, snugging these down. Ryan will go ahead and torque it. I can already tell you that, just from experience, I'm seeing clear field of view, no scope shadow. I'm not seeing inside the optic. And if I do move my head around just a little bit, I do get that scope shadow. So that's how I know that the eye box is as tight as possible. You'll often hear, especially with LPVOs, a lot of people like to get on the internet and say, oh, this optic is crap because it eye box this or eye box that. A lot of people talk about eye box without really understanding what the eye box is. So once you have this length of pull set up properly, once you have your cheek height and buttstock and everything else adjusted properly, and you are very consistent when you, not to talk about fundamentals too much, but when you're very consistent at building positions and you're consistent on your head position, the eye box, how tight it is, really doesn't have a whole lot of effect if you're very consistent, because you're gonna see the same eye relief and things like that in a perfect world. So if you are inconsistent in building your position, that's where you'll start complaining about the eye box. So if you're finding yourself complaining about eye box, I would look at, maybe record yourself on video or something and make sure that you're consistent both in the length as well as left and right placement and up and down. If you're fighting that, oftentimes I see it's less likely the scope and more likely the shooter. And I've been there. We all had to start somewhere. And as you build consistent position, you'll learn how to do this. Or, hey, now you know how to set your gun up properly because you just went off, what the internet said.
Another thing that I'll add, guys, to kind of wrap this up, I know it's a little bit longer, is this isn't a scope mounting video. There's plenty of those out there. I mean, I've done one from my old Achilles heel tactical days. You'll find a video there. But you'll see that my optic here, for instance, is further back. If you don't mind. You'll see that it's further back in the rings. The scope is favored back. I take this off the gas gun, I put it on the bolt gun and stuff like that. And the reason I do this is, well, first of all, unlike the guy at Cabela is telling you that it needs to be centered, it doesn't need to. As long as it's on the main tube and you're not going directly bumped up against the bell or the center of the optic right there. I favor the optic back because this goes, again, back to this eye relief and eye box and exit pupil thing. As I start to, I've had students where they would put the optic perfectly centered, and then when we correct their body position and adjust the length of pull and put it where we need the rifle to actually be, I would find sometimes, not every time, but some of the students would end up being on the furthest back pick slot on their bolt gun, for instance, and still need a little bit of the optic to come back. And we would have to remount the whole optic right there. Versus I favor back in the rings. Worst case, if I am too close, I have Picatinny, I can just pick up and move forward. Boom, done. That just comes with experience. So I mount this personally, like on the short action customs final scope level, and I do that. And I just know favor back. And that just comes with time and experience. But if you got a buddy, you guys can put the rings where you want, or the mount where you want, and put it how you need it to fit for you there. But you got anything to add to that? Yeah,
so just one thing I talked about a minute ago when we talked about the accessories. So hand me the timer.
Yep.
When mounting it like that, depending on how long your scope mount is, that would give you, options for, this is a timer, but someone uses the digital levels and things like that, data boards, etc. So now I know that I have plenty of room to mount that. It's clearing. I'm not affecting, covering up my bolt catches, mag releases, things like that, depending on if I'm left or right-handed, or it's not over the ejection port, etc., that can cause issues. So when you're setting this up, kind of have some thought, of what you're going to mount or what you may mount in the future, especially if it's already on order, etc., and then how you want to set things up. All right, so just knowing what, having a little forethought. I like to plan backwards, so find out where I want to go. Okay, I want to shoot long range. Now let's backwards plan what kind of gun, what kind of optic, how far do I want to shoot. So I got to plan like what cartridges, what gun setups, what magnification, all that I need. And then I base my purchases off that on reticle design, ring mounts, accessories, etc.
Yeah, so if you're just a guy that just shoots off of a bench and that's all you do, that's fine. You can set it up to that one position and be good to go because you're not doing anything different. Another thing is consideration of optic height with the mounts that you're buying and how that could interface with charging handles. Also, the objective bell, I definitely recommend at least 1.5s if you're going with like the bigger objective lens, like these 56 millimeters or 50 millimeters. Plus, they're absolute co-witness for like inline night vision and stuff like that. I definitely recommend, this is more gear setup, but an ambi charging handle for this stuff because the ocular housing sits further back that sometimes, especially with a lower mount, it's hard to get your hand in there, especially if you have a malfunction and it's really tight to rack the bolt back. This allows you to get both sides and pull back pretty easily. But just little considerations there. But I think that pretty much wraps up eye relief. All right, so we're on the tail end of stuff. We already did the gross adjustments on the cheek piece. We're just gonna hit jaw weld or cheek weld, considerations for either of those. Essentially just setting up your comb height. So that's another name for it. Instead of cheek pieces, you're setting up your comb height. One thing that you might see, and this is more for being too low to the ground, is someone that might be looking through their eyebrows as they're on the gun. So if I set this too low, Scott, so if that was too low, it's kind of like he's looking through his eyebrows there. This could also be a little bit of a factor of cheek piece as well. You could kind of set the cheek piece to better suit it for your body, so you're not doing that. There we go. All right, so back to normal. So if he was too high on it, he would find that he has to bury his face down to then get a good sight picture. A lot of this is preference. I know some very, very high level shooters that like to bury their face into the gun, and they do extremely well that way. It's just not personally my thing. I've kind of leaned more towards a jaw weld instead of a cheek weld. As long as you're consistent with whatever you do, you're good. So when you might like one or the other, I found that if you're a sniper and you are in a position in a hide sight or an FFP for a very, very long time, a cheek weld might be more beneficial because you can just rest your face on that gun and go to sleep like we were commonly taught, and then open your eyes and have a good sight picture, and you're not straining your neck. But for most competitive stuff that I'm doing now, I'm not worried about being in an FFP anymore and things like that. So I favor more of a jaw weld where I still have that contact reference point, but I'm not letting the weight of gravity fully collapse my head on it. Something you might see, and this is a little bit more into the fundamental realm, but it is a consideration, is it's possible you might see if you have more of your head weight on the cheek piece and adopting more of that cheek weld, you might see the reticle want to jump more and then off to the left as a right-handed shooter or off to the right as a left-handed shooter. These are things that you can play with. Find a middle ground. Doesn't have to be cheek, doesn't have to be jaw, it could be somewhere in the middle. These are just some considerations. But essentially what we want is comfort behind the gun. That is the premise behind everything with setting up the rifle. Yeah, that's pretty much what I got. You got anything to add to this, Scott?
No, just to talk about what he meant about the reticle jumping and stuff. The heavier, more head pressure you have down on the gun, the more, especially if you're using a real rear bag, the more grip strength you're going to require, or the bag tension you're going to require to hold the gun up. So if you're pressing down on it, especially on a heavier recoiling like magnums and things like that, the recoil's got to go somewhere. So if your head's pushing it down, the rear of the gun's going to want to go down, and your reticle's going to jump up. So as you start shooting and learning more about length of pull, setting up positions, not to get into a shooting part of the video, but kind of letting the reticle tell you what's happening. All right, so if you're too light, your head may slip and move around. That way, hey, that's when you're complaining about the eye box and things like that, just because you're inconsistent. So finding that happy medium on all this once you've got the gun set up for you. And that can also tell you, okay, well, I need to start making those micro adjustments with the cheek piece and stuff. So like, just as he was talking, I reset my position a few times as I was demoing everything, and I realized like I'm still a little high on my cheek piece. And so I'm gonna kind of rebuild a few times. I don't wanna just do this, because what'll happen is I'll subconsciously start changing my position on my head to account for any errors. Yep. So I wanna keep rebuilding that position. And I'm really nitpicking here. So that's too far. My position. All right. So to me, that's like perfect. So that's where my cheek piece would be. I could come in with paint markers and things, mark my wheel or whatever. Some people will add in spacers just so they can't go any lower, etc. Whatever works for you. So.
All right. Well, I know this was a much longer video than was intended, guys. But like I said in the intro, I really wanted to get more into the weeds of things. For those of you that actually care to watch a longer video, I know you guys are the ones that really care to learn more. The guys that just want the quick, short reels, this probably wasn't the one for you. Hell, you're probably not even seeing this part. But this is rifle setup. It's a little bit more in depth. But one thing I want to touch on one last time to reiterate, guys, it's completely okay if you have to fine tune as you start to shoot and gain experience. This is all just to get you as close as possible in the ballpark, shoot in different positions, go compete, go travel, go shoot in other locations, different ranges and different lighting conditions, and see what you like. And it's just gonna come with time and experience. Experience is the best teacher, and that's what's gonna find your own truth. So we're here to just kind of get you there, but go ahead and discover your own truths, guys. But Thanks for watching.